Good evening, and welcome back. Find a comfortable place to rest. Let your shoulders soften. Take a slow breath in and release it gently. Allow the noise of the outside world to fade, one thought at a time. Breathe again. Slower now, and let your attention settle upon the sound of this story. Tonight, we journey more than 3,000 years into the past, to a kingdom that believed its gods had ruled since the beginning of time, and to a young pharaoh who dared to challenge every sacred tradition his ancestors had built. Long before his name became one of the most controversial in Egyptian history, he was known simply as Amenhotep, the son of a dynasty that seemed favored by the heavens themselves. Egypt stood at the height of its power, the Nile flooded with remarkable regularity, spreading dark, fertile soil across the fields. Farmers harvested grain in astonishing abundance. Merchant ships sailed north toward the Mediterranean and south into Nubia, carrying gold, ivory, cedar, incense, and precious stones across the land. Towering temples honored dozens of gods, whose names echoed through every village, every marketplace, and every royal ceremony. The greatest among these sacred places was Karnak. Its colossal columns stretched toward the sky like a forest carved from stone. Priests in spotless white linen moved silently through vast halls scented with incense and myrrh. Sacred hymns drifted beneath painted ceilings while offerings of bread, wine, flowers, and fine oils were presented before the hidden sanctuary of Amun, the king of the gods. For generations, the temple had become more than a place of worship. It had become a center of wealth, a center of influence, a center of political power. The high priests commanded enormous estates, employed thousands of workers, and advised pharaohs themselves. Gold flowed into Karnak from every conquered province. Every successful harvest strengthened its influence. Every military victory was declared a blessing from Amun. No one imagined that this ancient order could ever be broken. Then the young prince began asking dangerous questions. Amenhotep was unlike many heirs before him. He showed little interest in military glory or lavish celebrations. Instead, he spent long hours watching the morning sunlight spread across palace walls and temple courtyards. Courtiers whispered that the prince often stood alone at dawn, his face turned toward the rising sun, as though listening for words no one else could hear. Some dismissed it as youthful curiosity. Others found it unsettling. His father, Amenhotep III, ruled one of the richest kingdoms Egypt had ever known. Diplomats arrived daily bearing gifts from distant kings. Artists filled the royal palaces with magnificent statues and vibrant paintings. Peace had brought prosperity, and prosperity had brought confidence. Yet beneath that confidence, invisible cracks had begun to appear. The priesthood of Amun had grown astonishingly powerful. Their influence reached into royal administration, taxation, trade, and diplomacy. Some officials quietly wondered whether Egypt possessed one ruler or two. The aging pharaoh noticed it. So did his son. Neither spoke openly, not yet. When Amenhotep III died, the weight of the double crown passed to the young prince. Trumpets sounded across Thebes. Crowds gathered beside the Nile. Priests performed the ancient ceremonies exactly as countless generations had done before. Sacred words invoked Horus, Osiris, Isis, Ptah, Amun, and dozens of other divine protectors whose blessings were believed essential for Egypt's survival. The new pharaoh repeated every ritual without objection. He smiled. He offered sacrifices. He accepted the blessings. To every observer, the transition appeared perfect, but behind the calm expression of the young king, another vision was already taking shape. One person recognized the change before anyone else. Queen Nefertiti, elegant, intelligent, and politically perceptive. She spent countless evenings beside her husband as they overlooked the Nile glowing beneath the fading light. She noticed how often his attention returned to the brilliant disk of the sun. "The light touches every field," he said quietly one evening. "It shines upon every child. It asks for nothing. It hides from no one." Nefertiti listened carefully. She understood these were not casual observations. They were convictions. The sun itself, Aten, had begun to occupy the center of the pharaoh's thoughts. Meanwhile, inside Karnak, the high priest Panessi supervised another magnificent procession honoring Amun. Thousands gathered to witness the sacred image carried through towering gateways while musicians played drums, sistra, and long silver trumpets. The ceremony inspired awe. It also demonstrated power. Panessi watched the crowds bow before the god with quiet satisfaction. As long as Egypt worshipped many gods, the temples would remain strong. The priesthood would remain indispensable. Far away, another man observed Egypt through very different eyes. General Horemheb, unlike the priests, his authority came not from temples but from soldiers. He inspected border fortresses, reviewed disciplined ranks of infantry, and received reports from distant provinces where rival kingdoms tested Egypt's resolve. He cared little for theological debates. Empires survived through strength, discipline, preparation. Any conflict within the royal court could weaken the kingdom's enemies no less than a defeated army. For now, he remained loyal to the new pharaoh, but loyalty often depended upon confidence. The decision spread through the royal palace as a whisper, then as a rumor, and finally as an unmistakable command. Amenhotep no longer wished to be remembered by the name given to him at birth. That name honored Amun, the very god whose influence had grown to rival the throne itself. Before the assembled court, he announced that he would bear a new name, Akhenaten, the one who was effective for Aten. The silence that followed was more unsettling than any protest. Courtiers bowed. Scribes recorded the proclamation. Priests exchanged guarded glances. No one challenged the pharaoh openly, but many understood what had truly happened. This was not merely the adoption of a new royal name. It was a declaration of war against centuries of religious tradition. Within days, the first royal decrees left the palace. Stonemasons received orders to erase the name of Amun from monuments commissioned by the crown. Royal artists were instructed to abandon familiar images of falcon-headed Horus, mighty Osiris, gentle Isis, and the countless deities who had watched over Egypt for generations. Every official inscription would now proclaim the glory of Aten alone. The change bewildered the kingdom. Some obeyed without question. Others whispered in private homes after sunset. How could one god suddenly replace all the others? Had the Nile stopped flowing because of Aten alone? Had the harvests always belonged to Aten? What of the dead? Who would guide them into the next life if Osiris was forgotten? Questions multiplied faster than answers. Inside the vast halls of Karnak, High Priest Panessi stood before the sacred sanctuary of Amun with a sealed royal decree in his hands. He read every line twice, then a third time. The words did not change. Temple revenues would be reduced, royal donations suspended. Ceremonies honoring Amun would no longer receive the support of the crown. Paneshi's face remained calm. Only his tightened grip upon the papyrus betrayed the storm within. For generations, pharaohs had come to Karnak seeking blessings. Now a pharaoh had ordered the temple to step aside. He gathered his senior priests. No voices were raised. No dramatic vows were spoken. Instead, a quiet understanding settled among them. Kings came and went. The gods endured, or so they believed. Akhenaten moved faster than anyone expected. More decrees followed. Temple workshops closed. Storehouses once filled with offerings fell silent. Processions that had drawn thousands through the streets of Thebes simply ceased. Massive wooden doors were sealed. Sacred statues disappeared into darkness. For ordinary Egyptians, the change felt deeply personal. Every family had its own household gods. Every village honored local protectors. Every birth, marriage, harvest, and funeral carried rituals passed from parent to child. Now officials arrived carrying royal orders. Only Aten, only the radiant disk of the sun, only one path to divine favor. Some complied from fear. Others hid small statues inside walls or beneath floor stones, praying in secret that ancient gods still listened. Queen Nefertiti stood beside Akhenaten through every proclamation. She appeared beside him during public ceremonies beneath the open sky, where sunlight poured directly upon the royal family. Artists captured scenes unlike anything Egypt had seen before. The pharaoh embraced his daughters openly. The royal family laughed together beneath Aten's rays. Gone were the rigid poses of earlier kings. Everything appeared strangely human, warm, intimate. To Akhenaten, these images revealed a new truth. To many nobles, they seemed to erase the majesty of the throne itself. Far from the palace, General Horemheb received troubling reports. Messengers from Syria described growing unrest along Egypt's northern frontier. Allied rulers pleaded for military assistance against ambitious rivals. Some letters went unanswered. Others waited months for a response. The pharaoh's attention had shifted inward. His greatest campaign was no longer against foreign kingdoms. It was against Egypt's own traditions. Horemheb frowned as he read each dispatch. Borders ignored today would become battlefields tomorrow. He requested an audience with the king. The request was delayed. Then delayed again. Court officials explained that Akhenaten was occupied with religious ceremonies dedicated to Aten. For the first time, Horemheb wondered whether the kingdom's greatest danger lay beyond its borders or within them. Then came the proclamation that stunned even loyal supporters. The royal capital itself would move. Thebes, the ancient heart of Egypt and home to the mighty temples of Amun, would be abandoned as the center of royal power. A completely new city would rise upon untouched desert land, a place where no older god had ever been worshipped. Its name would be Akhetaten, the horizon of Aten. Thousands of workers marched into the empty desert. Surveyors measured foundations beneath the blazing sun. Quarries thundered with activity. Stone blocks moved day and night. An entire capital seemed to rise from the sand with astonishing speed. Palaces, temples, broad avenues, gardens, residences for officials. Everything dedicated to a single god. Everything centered upon a single vision. Everything dependent upon a single man. Watching the endless columns of workers disappear toward the horizon, Akhetaten rose from the desert with astonishing speed. Where only months before there had been empty cliffs and drifting sand, broad avenues now stretched beneath the relentless Egyptian sun. White limestone temples reflected the daylight so brilliantly that travelers approaching the city often shielded their eyes. Unlike the ancient sanctuaries of Karnak, whose sacred chambers disappeared into cool darkness, the temples of Aten had no hidden inner rooms. Everything stood beneath the open sky. Nothing was concealed. The sunlight itself became the sanctuary. Akhenaten believed truth should never hide in shadows. To him, every ray of the sun was proof that Aten watched equally over kings and commoners alike. As the royal family entered their magnificent new capital, musicians played triumphant hymns unlike any Egypt had heard before. Gone were the ancient chants to Amun. Gone were the familiar prayers carried across countless generations. Now, thousands of voices sang only one name, Aten, again, and again, and again. The pharaoh stood upon a raised platform beside Queen Nefertiti. Together they lifted offerings toward the glowing solar disk while artists hurried to immortalize every gesture in carved stone. For a moment, Akhenaten believed history itself had turned. The old gods were fading. A new age had begun. Yet beneath the celebrations, cracks widened. Many officials had relocated to Akhetaten only because they had no choice. Noble families left behind estates that had belonged to their ancestors for generations. Scribes copied unfamiliar prayers with uncertain hands. Craftsmen carved images of Aten while quietly wondering whether the old gods had truly abandoned them or merely waited. Each evening, when palace servants returned to their homes, some lit small oil lamps before hidden figures of Isis or Osiris concealed behind woven baskets or inside clay jars. Faith did not disappear because a decree demanded it. It simply became silent. High Priest Panahesi remained in Thebes. The once crowded courtyards of Karnak had grown strangely empty. Dust settled where festivals had once filled the air with music. Sacred pools reflected abandoned columns. The enormous temple still dominated the landscape, yet its heartbeat had slowed. Panahesi walked alone through the silent halls. He ran his hand across ancient inscriptions carved centuries before Akhenaten's birth. Pharaohs had come, pharaohs had died. Dynasties had risen and fallen. Still, the gods had endured. He refused to believe this king would prove different. Rather than confront the throne openly, Panahesi chose patience. He encouraged priests to preserve sacred texts, hide statues, protect traditions. Stone remembers, he whispered. So do people. Hundreds of miles away, General Horemheb faced dangers that could not be ignored. Messengers arrived almost daily carrying desperate appeals from Egypt's allies in Syria and Canaan. Cities once loyal to Pharaoh reported attacks. Trade routes became increasingly dangerous. Local rulers begged for soldiers. More than once Horemheb rode personally to the palace requesting permission to reinforce Egypt's borders. Each audience ended in frustration. Akhenaten listened politely, then returned the conversation to Aten. The favor of Aten will preserve Egypt. Horemheb lowered his eyes respectfully, yet inside, doubt hardened into alarm. Empires were not defended by prayers alone. They were defended by disciplined armies. Every unanswered plea weakened Egypt's authority abroad. Every month of hesitation emboldened its rivals. Even within Akhetaten, unease quietly spread. Harvest reports grew less encouraging. Tax shipments arrived smaller than expected. Merchants complained of declining trade. Some blamed drought. Others blamed foreign unrest. Ordinary people whispered a different explanation. The gods were angry. The Nile still flowed. The sun still rose, yet life no longer felt certain. Mothers carried hidden amulets beneath their clothing. Farmers buried tiny figures of Osiris beneath newly planted grain. Fishermen quietly offered prayers to Sobek before launching onto the river. Fear revived ancient habits faster than royal officials could suppress them. Queen Nefertiti watched these changes with increasing concern. She remained fiercely loyal to her husband, yet she could not ignore what she heard from trusted attendants. The people obeyed, but many no longer believed. One evening she found Akhenaten studying the setting sun from the palace terrace. "The city is beautiful," she said softly. "It is, but beauty alone cannot silence doubt." Akhenaten remained silent. "The old temples held Egypt captive," he finally answered. "They taught people to fear countless gods. Aten offers only light." Nefertiti wanted to agree. Instead, she asked the question no advisor dared speak. "And if the people choose darkness?" The pharaoh did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed upon the glowing horizon. "They will learn." His certainty frightened her more than anger would have, because certainty left no room for compromise. As the months passed, Akhenaten withdrew further from the daily burdens of government. Diplomatic correspondence accumulated unanswered. Military reports waited unopened. Court officials increasingly made decisions without royal guidance. Power did not disappear. It shifted. Horemheb commanded greater respect within the army. Panahesi's influence quietly returned among the priesthood. Noble families began speaking privately of the future, not the present, the future. as though they already sensed Akhenaten's revolution could not last forever. Then an unexpected illness spread through parts of the royal household. Servants whispered nervously. Physicians moved constantly through palace corridors. Some members of the royal family vanished from public ceremonies. No official explanations satisfied the growing rumors. The city built to celebrate eternal light suddenly felt strangely subdued. Even Akhenaten's confidence appeared touched by uncertainty. Standing alone beneath Aten's rays, he searched the brilliant sky that had once filled him with absolute conviction. But the heavens offered no spoken answer, and beyond the shining walls of Akhetaten, old loyalties, old gods, and old ambitions were gathering strength. Soon, the struggle would no longer be fought with decrees and prayers alone. It would become a battle for the future of Egypt itself. The silence surrounding Akhenaten grew heavier with every passing season. From the terraces of Akhetaten, the city still appeared magnificent. Sunlight washed over polished limestone. Temple walls gleamed beneath the endless blue sky, and priests of Aten raised their voices in hymns each morning, as though nothing had changed. But beyond the city's elegant streets, Egypt was beginning to unravel. Messengers arrived from every corner of the empire, their sandals worn thin from desperate journeys. Clay tablets from Canaan spoke of rebellious governors. Letters from loyal vassals pleaded for soldiers that never came. Fortresses once guarded by Egyptian authority now stood isolated, their commanders wondering whether the pharaoh had forgotten them. General Horemheb read each report in silence. Every message carried the same warning. Egypt's enemies were no longer testing its borders, they were crossing them. He gathered his officers inside a military camp overlooking the Nile. Maps covered the table before them. Red markings spread farther each month. Trade routes weakened, garrisons dwindled, allies surrendered without support. One veteran finally broke the silence. If we wait much longer, there may be no empire left to defend. Horemheb closed his eyes for only a heartbeat. He had sworn loyalty to the pharaoh, but he had also sworn to protect Egypt. For the first time, those two promises no longer pointed in the same direction. Inside Karnak, High Priest Panahesi sensed the balance shifting. For years he had hidden sacred statues inside sealed chambers. Scrolls had been buried beneath temple floors. Trusted priests quietly preserved rituals that royal officials believed forgotten. Now ordinary Egyptians returned after sunset. Not openly, never openly, one family at a time. A farmer carrying fresh bread, a mother bringing flowers, an old soldier lighting a single oil lamp. No proclamations, no public ceremonies, only whispered prayers offered in darkness to gods they had never truly abandoned. Panahesi welcomed them without triumph. He knew faith survived not because kings commanded it, but because people carried it within themselves. Queen Nefertiti walked through the palace with growing unease. She noticed empty seats where trusted advisors had once gathered. She noticed servants lowering their voices whenever she approached. She noticed that Akhenaten spent longer hours alone beneath the open sky, speaking of Aten while avoiding conversations about famine, diplomacy, or war. One evening she confronted him. The kingdom needs its king. Akhenaten looked toward the western horizon where the sun slowly descended. The kingdom needs truth. It needs both. Her words lingered between them. Neither spoke again. Neither spoke again. It was the last truly honest conversation they would share. Soon afterward, Nefertiti vanished from official records. Some believed she had died unexpectedly. Others believed she withdrew from public life. A few whispered that political divisions inside the palace had finally reached the royal family itself. History would never reveal the complete truth. Only silence remained. Then illness reached the pharaoh. At first it appeared insignificant, a lingering weakness, days of exhaustion, Court physicians assured everyone that Aten's chosen ruler merely required rest, but the weakness deepened. Audiences were cancelled. Royal processions ceased. The windows of the palace remained closed. Rumors spread through Akhetaten faster than any official announcement. If the living representative of Aten could become so fragile, what did that say about the god who promised perfect order? Fear returned with astonishing speed. Hidden statues emerged from concealed chambers. Forgotten prayers were spoken once more. People who had praised Aten publicly now begged ancient gods for protection inside their own homes. The revolution that had taken years to build began collapsing in whispered moments around kitchen fires and family altars. General Horemheb finally arrived in Akhetaten. He found a city outwardly beautiful, yet inwardly uncertain. Soldiers guarded magnificent gates while merchants quietly packed their belongings. Officials avoided one another's eyes. No one knew who would rule if the pharaoh died. Horemheb walked through the great temple of Aten. Its vast open courts were flooded with sunlight. There were no towering statues watching from shadowed halls, no mysterious sanctuaries hidden behind heavy doors. Only light, beautiful, endless, and strangely empty. He understood then that Akhenaten had tried to reshape not only religion, but memory itself, to erase thousands of years with a single generation. No empire could survive such a wound without consequence. Then the palace doors closed completely. For days, no royal appearance, no proclamation, no celebration beneath the rising sun. Only anxious servants moving silently through dim corridors. The announcement came. The pharaoh was dead. No explanation accompanied the message. No public account described his final hours. Some believed disease claimed him. Others suspected poison. A few whispered that powerful enemies inside the court had decided Egypt could endure his revolution no longer. Whatever the truth, Akhenaten's voice fell silent, and with his silence, the city he had built began to lose its purpose. Across Egypt, the news spread like a wind sweeping across the Nile. The king who had commanded an entire civilization to abandon its ancient gods was gone, but his greatest trial had only just begun, because death would not end the judgment against Akhenaten. His successors were preparing something far more devastating than assassination. They intended to erase him so completely that future generations would scarcely remember he had ever existed at all. Death did not end Akhenaten's struggle. It only placed his fate in the hands of those who had waited patiently for years. Within days of the pharaoh's passing, the palace that had once echoed with hymns to Aten became a place of hurried meetings and whispered decisions. Royal officials who had spoken confidently of the new faith now searched one another's faces, measuring loyalties that had shifted almost overnight. The throne could not remain empty. Egypt demanded a king, but more than that, it demanded certainty. A young ruler was elevated to continue the royal line. At first, he bore the name Tutankhaten, honoring the radiant disk that Akhenaten had proclaimed as the sole divine power. Yet the advisors surrounding the young king understood that the kingdom stood upon fragile ground. Provinces had slipped away, trade had weakened, the army questioned the direction of the court. Temples, though wounded, had never truly surrendered. One decision changed everything. The young pharaoh abandoned the name Tutankhaten. He became Tutankhamun. The name of Amun returned to the throne. It was more than a new royal title. It was a public confession that Akhenaten's revolution had failed. The restoration moved swiftly. The sealed doors of Karnak opened once again. Priests emerged carrying sacred statues hidden for years within secret chambers. Incense rose once more through towering halls. Bells rang across temple courtyards. Crowds gathered in numbers unseen since before Akhenaten's reforms. Families wept openly. Old prayers returned to familiar lips. For countless Egyptians, it felt less like the return of forgotten gods, and more like the return of home itself. High Priest Panahisi stood before the restored sanctuary of Amun with quiet satisfaction. He claimed no personal victory. Time itself had become his greatest ally. kings could command obedience, they could not command belief. Faith, he understood, lived not in monuments, but in memory. General Horemheb continued rebuilding what war and neglect had nearly destroyed. He strengthened border fortresses, recalled experienced officers, repaired alliances abandoned during the years of religious upheaval. Every campaign sought not glory, but stability. He rarely spoke publicly of Akhenaten. Silence served his purpose better than condemnation. The fewer people remembered the former pharaoh, the easier it became to restore confidence in the crown. Then came the systematic destruction, stone by stone, name by name, image by image. Royal craftsmen received extraordinary orders. The cartouches bearing Akhenaten's name were chiseled from temple walls. Reliefs depicting Aten disappeared beneath fresh layers of carved stone. Statues were shattered, colossal monuments dismantled and reused as ordinary building material. Akhetaten itself began to empty. Palaces fell silent. Gardens withered beneath drifting sand. Columns cracked beneath years of neglect. Families departed one after another, until only wind remained to wander the broad avenues that had once proclaimed the dawn of a new age. The city built to last forever survived scarcely a generation. It became a ghost, a memory buried beneath the desert. Years later, Horemheb himself ascended the throne. As pharaoh, he completed what earlier rulers had begun. Official king lists simply omitted Akhenaten. It was as though he had never ruled. Later generations referred to the years of his reign as a time of disorder best forgotten. History itself became another battlefield, not fought with swords, but with chisels. Erase the name, erase the image, erase the memory, erase the memory. If no record remained, perhaps the revolution itself would disappear. For centuries, it almost did. More than 3,000 years passed. The Nile continued its endless journey toward the sea. Empires rose and vanished. Languages changed. Temples crumbled. The desert patiently covered the abandoned city with sand and silence. Then archaeologists arrived. Beneath the drifting dunes, they uncovered broad streets, unlike any other in Egypt. They found delicate carvings of a royal family, embracing their children beneath rays of sunlight. They uncovered inscriptions, speaking not of many gods, but of one. The forgotten king had returned, not through conquest, not through descendants, but through the stubborn endurance of stone. Historians slowly reconstructed the astonishing story. A pharaoh had attempted one of history's most radical religious revolutions. He had challenged traditions older than memory itself. He had closed mighty temples, weakened an ancient priesthood, founded an entirely new capital, and demanded that an entire civilization abandon the gods it had worshipped for centuries. For a brief moment, he succeeded. Then the world pushed back. Whether Akhenaten was a visionary far ahead of his time, or a ruler whose unwavering certainty blinded him to the realities of governing, remains a question historians still debate. Perhaps he genuinely believed Aten offered a purer understanding of the divine. Perhaps he sought to free the throne from the immense political power of the priesthood. Perhaps both were true. History rarely belongs to simple answers. It belongs to complicated people making irreversible choices. The greatest irony of Akhenaten's life is impossible to ignore. He tried to erase hundreds of gods from Egypt. Instead, future generations nearly erased him. His temples disappeared. His capital collapsed. His statues were broken. His very name was struck from monuments across the kingdom. Yet complete oblivion never came, because ideas, like sunlight, have a remarkable way of finding even the smallest opening. Today, the ruins of Akhetaten still rest beneath the Egyptian sky, and the carved face of Akhenaten continues to challenge everyone who studies his reign. He remains the pharaoh who dared to confront an entire civilization's faith, the king who believed one god could replace thousands, the ruler who sought to reshape eternity itself, and the man whose greatest battle was never fought against foreign armies, but against memory. In the end, the temples returned. The old gods returned. The empire endured, but so did the question Akhenaten left behind. Can any ruler truly command what people choose to believe? Or does belief always outlive the throne that seeks to control it? Good evening. If you're still with me, then let us remain here for just a little longer, because some stories refuse to end when the final king is buried. Some stories linger, hidden beneath drifting sand, waiting patiently for another generation to uncover them. For nearly 3,000 years, the desert kept its promise. Wind swept endlessly across the empty cliffs where Akhetaten had once shimmered beneath the Egyptian sun. Every season another thin veil of sand settled across abandoned streets. Palaces that had echoed with laughter became silent shells. Courtyards where children of the royal family once chased one another beneath the rays of Aten slowly disappeared beneath layers of dust. Nature possesses a patience unlike any empire. It never hurries. It never forgets. It simply waits. Travelers occasionally crossed the region, unaware that beneath their feet rested one of history's boldest experiments. Shepherds guided their flocks across broken foundations without realizing they walked over royal halls. Generations lived and died, never knowing a forgotten capital slept beneath the earth. History itself had accepted the lie. The campaign to erase Akhenaten had been astonishingly successful. Ancient king lists ignored him. Temple inscriptions skipped over his reign. Later pharaohs claimed the monuments he built as their own. Massive stone blocks from Akhetaten were dismantled and reused inside newer temples, as though the city had existed only to provide convenient building material. It was a ruthless victory, not merely over a king, but over memory itself. And yet, memory has strange allies. Stone remembers. Sand protects. Time reveals. Centuries later, scholars began noticing something unusual inside later Egyptian monuments. Hidden within walls were carved blocks, bearing unfamiliar artistic styles. Faces appeared longer. Bodies looked more natural. Above them stretched countless rays descending from a single solar disk. No ordinary decoration, something entirely different. Piece by piece, fragment by fragment, a forgotten world began emerging. Excavations uncovered broad avenues unlike any other Egyptian city. Workshops still contained abandoned tools. Broken pottery remained where craftsmen had left it thousands of years before. Children's toys appeared beneath collapsed homes. Letters written upon clay tablets still waited to be read. The city had not simply vanished. It had been frozen, almost as though its people had stepped away for only a single afternoon. Every discovery raised new questions. Who exactly had Akhenaten been? A visionary? A fanatic? A philosopher wearing the crown of Egypt? Or a ruler whose certainty became his greatest weakness? The evidence refuses easy answers. Some historians argue he introduced one of humanity's earliest forms of monotheism, centuries before similar ideas transformed other civilizations. Others believe religion served only as the surface, beneath which lay a far more practical struggle. The priesthood of Amun had accumulated extraordinary wealth, land, labor, political influence. Perhaps Akhenaten did not simply challenge the gods. Perhaps he challenged the institutions that spoke in their names. If that was his true goal, then his revolution becomes something far more familiar throughout history. Power rarely surrenders peacefully, whether dressed in crowns, uniforms, sacred robes, or modern suits. It clings tightly to itself. Akhenaten underestimated one truth. Destroying buildings is simple. Changing belief is almost impossible. Every closed temple drove worship into private homes. Every forbidden prayer became more precious. Every shattered statue strengthened the memory of what had been lost. The more forcefully he demanded one faith, the more stubbornly people protected another. It is one of history's oldest paradoxes. Compulsion often creates resistance. Silence often preserves ideas better than speeches. Even Horemheb, the general who ultimately restored order, could not erase every trace of the revolution. His masons removed names. His officials rewrote records. His monuments celebrated stability over change. Yet complete victory escaped him, because thousands of years later, we remember the pharaoh he tried to erase. Ironically, many visitors to Egypt today recognize Akhenaten more readily than Horemheb himself. History possesses a quiet sense of humor. The forgotten become famous. The victorious fade into footnotes. And perhaps nowhere is that irony stronger than in the face of Queen Nefertiti. Her famous bust, discovered far from the royal palace that once housed it, became one of the most recognizable works of ancient art ever created. Calm, elegant, timeless. She survived where entire temples did not. A single sculpture outlived an empire's campaign of destruction. Perhaps that is history's greatest lesson. Ideas survive in unexpected places. A fragment, a letter, a cracked wall, a forgotten name. They wait patiently until someone begins asking questions again. Even today, scholars continue debating the mysteries surrounding Akhenaten's family. The fate of Nefertiti remains uncertain. The circumstances of the pharaoh's death remain unclear. The succession after his reign still contains gaps that no excavation has fully answered. Each discovery solves one mystery and creates another. That is why Akhenaten continues to fascinate historians, not because every answer has been found, but because so many remain hidden. Perhaps somewhere beneath untouched Egyptian sand lies another sealed chamber, another archive, another inscription waiting to reveal the thoughts of a king who dared imagine an entirely different world. Or perhaps those answers disappeared forever, carried away by chisels, wind, and time. The desert keeps many secrets. Some it returns, others it guards forever. And so we leave Akhetaten as evening settles over the Nile once more. The sunlight that Akhenaten worshipped slowly sinks beneath the western horizon, just as it did more than 3,000 years ago. It shines without choosing kings, without honoring victories, without mourning defeat. Empires rise, empires fall. Gods are worshipped, gods are forgotten, names are carved into stone, names are erased. Yet the sun continues its silent journey across the heavens, indifferent to every throne built beneath it. Perhaps that is the final irony of Akhenaten's extraordinary life. The one eternal power he believed he had discovered never needed a pharaoh at all.